is it the right move to ask an AI to do something if you knew that the answer was just like pouring a whole water bottle down the drain every time you did it?
I love that you brought that up, Tiffany. I think that's something that's really important that isn't very front of mind for folks. It's amazing, but it consumes an enormous amount of energy. And I think you're asking a really good question about, like, from a resource point of view, what's going to be the impact of this? The AI that you're using is working because there's vast amounts of electrons moving around.
Hey everyone, here at Cocoy.ai, and today I have a special guest, Tim Sheiner, who is an amazing systems thinker I've worked with for many years, know him really well, and he's here to talk about all of the things that Cocoy cares about: career advice, creative outlet, making money and monetization and growth mindset, and even the future. I think Tim is amazing at getting people to come along and telling stories. So what a better way to start off this series. So Tim, how do we know each other?
Well, we met at Salesforce in the IoT project, and I kind of parachuted in there and discovered this fascinating, talented woman named Tiffany. And I mean, I think if I'm frank, maybe in the beginning, we didn't know exactly how to interact with each other, but right away I realized, ask Tiffany a question, she'll give you an answer, and someone that I could talk to straight up about what was working and what wasn't. And you've turned into one of my closest, dearest friends.
That is amazing to hear. And the same likewise goes to you. I wanted to jump right into it and ask you a little bit about career advice and leadership. What key skills should emerging design leaders focus on in thriving in an AI-enhanced industry?
Well, okay, first of all, I think anybody who tells you that they know for sure the answer to that, I wouldn't trust them, because I think we're all figuring it out. But I guess the thing that I'm assuming is that what AI is going to do for the user experience world is it's going to more and more automate the UI part of the work. So what that means is that if that's true, it's going to be more about, as a leader or whatever in the UX space, it's going to be even more about sort of managing or thinking about the big picture and how to direct stuff. And like, if you're a design manager, you're already experienced in trying to lead through example and guide your people to do what you want. But I think, we haven't really seen it yet, but I think we're going to start seeing it in our tools. Like we have our AI companion along with us, and a lot as a designer, you're going to even more and more be like guiding the tool. Like it's going to be able to iterate in real time, as opposed to what you and I are used to now, where client asks us something, or our partner's like, okay, we need to design this thing, and then I got to go off and do an iteration, and it could take me a couple of days or whatever. I think we're going to be iterating, in real time, and as a result, that driving that iteration, getting it to go where you want. Like, I think that's a key piece. So another key skill I think that I'm pretty sure is going to be stable and valuable is, as you mentioned, I'm a systems thinker. I think that's an important piece, is to really start pulling back from, designing around the screen so much as really thinking about what is the system that we're creating and how the pieces fit together. And I think, already we're seeing, more and more what, certainly at the corporate level, software needs to be deeply integrated across different tools, et cetera. And I think that's going to be a key skill, is to develop that ability to see how things are connected, thinking about inputs and outputs, feedback, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, thinking about the future, I kind of go back into like, how did it all start? What inspired you to pursue this career path, and how did you get started? And is that the same for how someone that is fresh out of college, what advice would you give them?
Well, okay, so a couple questions there. I'll take the origin story one first. I think, well, there's two things. How did I start being a designer? That happened because I met someone. I was in college, and I I'd switched my majors a couple of times, and I was majoring in biology, which was interesting, but I didn't really think I was going to pursue a career in it. And then I met someone who'd gone to design school, and she said, I think you might be interested in design school. And at that point, I just didn't even know that was a career. Like it just had not ever entered on my radar screen. And so, because I had thought about engineering, but I was like, well, engineering's not quite right. That's not exactly what I want to do. And so then I looked into it and I was like, oh, okay, I think that's it. So, but then when I was going to graduate school in design, product design was strictly physical. I mean, there was software obviously, but it was, like I like to say, it was basically all gray and Microsoft made it. But then what happened is the internet, specifically the World Wide Web, like that's the internet had been there for a while, right? But that was the thing that really caught my attention. And I remember very clearly, my friend showed me the Mosaic browser, which was one of the earliest graphical browsers. And it almost in an instant, I had this epiphany that first of all, I was like, oh, that's the future. I definitely want to work on that. And second of all, I thought, hey, that's a product. And it's not that great of a product, but people are going to want their software to be as cool and sexy and interesting and compelling and personal as all their other products. And everything they taught me in design school ought to apply to software. So that was how I kind of got started. It was just like a big bang. And then obviously back then, the internet, like World Wide Web, anyone could instantly be, everybody was an expert or no one was an expert because it was just all starting.
Well, I know we've talked about it a little bit, but what was that kernel that made you decide design rather than engineering or?
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, one thing was to be able to be in touch with my more creative side. Another thing, it also depends what, I was at Harvard, and engineering there was almost like applied math, right? Whereas I think if I might have been at Stanford, where I ended up going to graduate school, engineering there might have more, because growing up as a teenager, I worked as an auto mechanic. I really liked taking things apart and making things. I did machine shop in high school. And so, that's very much a part of the Stanford engineering program, and it wasn't at all part of the Harvard engineering program. So it might have been a different situation, but that was the main thing that I noticed when I thought about engineering as an undergrad is that's not really getting in touch with the actual making side of things. And so,
that creates,
yeah.
So that's sorry. So that creativity is would you say that's the thing that brings you joy in being a designer? Is that still true?
Yes. Although, another thing that I really got from my design program was, this user-centered design. That was not, again, I went there with a very immature understanding of design, and I got there and they were need finding, you need to interview people, hang out with them, watch their situation, let them tell you their stories. And that very quickly became, fascinating to me. And so I like the learning part of it. And then I think certainly I get enormous joy out of the feeling that me and my team have made something that makes somebody's life a little easier.
Yeah, totally. Would you say the same is true for graduates, this next generation? Do you think they can have similar paths with this AI future?
Well, on the one hand, I would like to say patterns just keep repeating, and so yes. On the other hand, it's interesting. Another part of what got me interested in software at the time was a recognition that one thing I noticed was hey, these people, they're making everything custom all the time. And I had come from this physical product design world where, most of what you were doing was assembling pre-made components. And we finally, so I thought that would happen pretty quickly. Now it's 30 years later, and it's definitely happened, but it's still not totally there. In other words, in the physical world, in the United States, there's two kinds of screw threads. There's national coarse and national fine, and there's a very set, these are the sizes of the fasteners. In software, we still don't have that, that kind of standardization. So this is all by way of saying, I think software is still pretty immature industry, although obviously it's, amazingly advanced from when I got into it. So I think there's a lot of room to grow. And I think obviously, I'm certain that this AI thing is, it's definitely not fad or right. It's like, it's going to change the experience certainly as dramatically as the World Wide Web itself or the iPhone. There's certain things that like really change, really changed how we interact with technology in my lifetime. And this one is definitely one of those. So I guess I'm not really answering your question, Tiffany, because I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen in the future. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I just mean, okay, actually, one thing I do think is that in the past, if you had wanted to be a programmer, you were definitely going to have to learn a lot about some pretty specific language syntax. And I think going forward, you're going to be more and more people are going to be able to get computers to do what they want using natural language. So in that sense, it might be a little easier to get into the field and be able to do really interesting creative things because there's these tools that now, I'm not saying, I still believe craft is going to be a huge part of, design and production and stuff, but it might be actually easier to get into software. So like I said, when the World Wide Web started, it was really easy to be a web designer because the technology was really simple and anyone could learn it and no one was an expert at it. So maybe that's what we're facing with AI now, where like technology is not simple, but it's pretty simple to interact with and it produces incredible results without a huge amount of background and training.
Well, from a personal level, I know you have pretty much 3 freshly minted adults. Have you seen any impact in your kids going out into the world trying to be an adult? Have they seen any impact on their careers?
Well, so I can tell you a story. One of my sons was working for a while for a design agency here in San Francisco, and the guy who runs that's a good friend of mine. And I was talking to him the other day, and he told me this fun story about my son, which was that they were working on a project that involved one part of it involved figuring out how to do a sort of a complicated kind of distribution of color across this logo. Excuse me. And he asked Jacob to figure out the math of how to do it. And Jacob just started using ChatGPT to get ChatGPT to write a script to do it. And then Jacob also got ChatGPT to explain to him, like, how do you run the script, like, what, et cetera. And Hugh, the guy who runs W Design, he told me, like, watching Jacob do that was that opened Hugh's eyes to like the power of. So I guess my answer to your question was like I think for my son, it was like, okay, I don't know the answer, I'll just ask ChatGPT. Whereas, the generation later didn't realize that was there yet. So I think that the younger people, obviously, that have this facility and like they're tied into all the social media, right? They're going to see all this stuff coming out and they're going to be aware of the technology, whether they've used it or not. They're going to have in their mind, okay, if I have this problem, there's that thing I haven't tried yet, but now I know about it. I'll go find it.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It's almost like when I see my own kids just going immediately and understanding how to get to YouTube, and just the way that they get information is so different than when I was a child. And I think it's changing so rapidly. But it also makes me think, like earlier today, I had this thought of the impact of AI on the world, not just from a workplace, but also I saw an article about Microsoft consuming 32% more water. Is it the right move to ask an AI to do something if you knew that the answer was just like pouring a whole water bottle down the drain every time you did it?
I love that you brought that up, Tiffany. I think that's something really important that isn't very front of mind for folks, which is like, obviously people that have used, ChatGPT 4, it's amazing. but it consumes an enormous amount of energy. And I think you're asking a really good question about, like, from a resource point of view, what's going to be the impact of this? And I don't know. I mean, obviously, it's clear to, at this point, everyone in the world, that we have to have a different relationship with our energy use. It's, so there's, last Saturday, actually, we did a workshop with a bunch of folks, designers, around, like, does AI, how's it impacting your work, patterns, things like that. And one of the topics, this topic came up, and a number of the people that were very bullish on it was like, okay, but the costs are coming way down. And certainly that happened with, personal computers, right? They got faster and faster and cheaper. So it could be that this issue that you and I are talking about will become less important. But right now, I do think it is interesting and critical for people to realize, like, the AI that you're using is working because there's vast amounts of electrons moving around.
Right. So even with, like, Bitcoin too is a good example, or how much does ChatGPT 5 take to train, or the energy consumption is shocking.
Yeah. And it's easy for us to, and there's, like, we can talk about it. I don't personally feel it, except for, we are all definitely now feeling the effects of global warming. There's no question about that. But it's just this, it's not direct. That's I think the issue. Like, from a human behavioral point of view, it's problematic that there's this latency and indirectness between, using this technology and the impacts of it. That's how we got where we are right now.
I think about it much more as a parent of what my children's future will be than I ever did as an individual. And even after having this conversation, I can still get super frustrated using ChatGPT and it telling me in the paid version that you've already allotted your hourly amount of queries. And what does that mean? That means I've used so much resources just in 1 hour. And
so that's a good question. Like, should it have something more like a gas gauge, or or something like, how many, to your point, how many glasses of water have been poured down the drain since you asked this question about, like, something trivial that, because I'm saying this, but I'm a little hypocritical. I'm starting to use ChatGPT, like, for questions that I could Google. I don't even Google them anymore. I just, like, I've been working on designing, it's called an accessory dwelling unit, and I've been using ChatGPT to tell me all different code requirements that I could easily look up without using ChatGPT. And I might do it differently if I actually was aware of how much energy is being used.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a market for an app like that. Anyway, that's my product mind ticking there. I did do something similar where I very much could have asked Google what rhymes with a certain word, but the thing that was open was ChatGPT, and I asked that. It's an interesting conversation, and I'm sure it'll come up between us in the future. On the positive side, I've seen so many different technologies and gadgets that have come up. From your perspective, what are the most impactful ones that you've seen so far? Or have you played with any AI tools or personal gadgets, or seen any of the announcements that seem super interesting?
Well, okay, obviously ChatGPT, that's my primary experience. Obviously all of us have been interacting with AI for a while, like Netflix making recommendations or whatever, but we haven't necessarily noticed it. But certainly that's the primary one that I've, as far as a tool that I've been using. I watched the keynote for the Rabbit device. Have you seen that thing?
Yeah, the R1.
It looks super cool. The main thing that I thought was fascinating about that, which was, they made a big deal about it, was, that they're using the large language model to understand what you're talking about. And then they have, I think, what they call their large action model, where to actually take effect. Because that's like one big thing, right? When you use ChatGPT, it can't do anything in the real world. It can tell you things, but it can't actually execute. And what I thought was very interesting about the rabbit approach is that they're like, basically they've trained a model to be able to use websites. So, you give it a login, so it can have a token to log into a website for you. And then when you say like, whatever, order me a dinner, it goes on, Uber Eats and orders it for you basically. I think it's what I think is interesting about that is that they're just replacing me clicking with a machine that can click. It's kind of an interesting, I think it gets back to what we were talking about earlier, where the fact is because there's not enough standards in the software industry, the easiest way to do that is just just use their website as opposed to like try to connect to their backend directly. That's just my system I'm thinking there.
I thought I was reading an article on more of the design philosophy on how they got to the form factor and how it was kind of like a Tamagotchi feel of these little rabbits that go and do all of these tasks for it. It's kind of like TaskRabbit, but in the digital world. And I thought that was interesting. I like the retro feel of the one scrolling and the little camera thing. I also really liked that it's not a subscription model, that humane pin with the subscription. So you're now carrying 2 devices and you're carrying multiple subscriptions. I'd less likely to try that out than that rabbit thing.
Yeah. What about you, Tiffany? Is there any other devices or gadgets that you're interested in? I'd be curious to hear.
I mean, those two, I'm not interested in necessarily buying that Vision Pro. I do want to try it. I want to try it. I don't see a real use case for it, but I'd like to try it. I don't know.
I mean, my experience with that was, not with Vision Pro, but I did have an experience, while I was at Salesforce at one point. My team all got the Meta headsets, and this was instead of doing an actual offsite where we all went somewhere together, we did sort of this. We tried out this virtual offsite, and I will say that it definitely made, at that point at least, meetings were much better than with Zoom or Google Meet, because I thought the killer feature was the spatial audio. And so conversations where I could talk softly to someone next to me, or all the stuff that happens in an online meeting where people talk over each other, et cetera, like we did this just a minute ago, that all goes away. So that was, for me, the first time when I thought, okay, it could be worth it to put this headset on my head. That one, a little heavy, it made me a little bit nauseous. I don't know, I can totally believe that Apple is going to actually produce the one that's actually comfortable and fun to wear and et cetera. But I also have this it seems really weird to me to put a device between me and the real world.
Yeah, totally. I'm sure there's some kind of use case that will get me super excited and finally make sense. I remember for the Apple Watch, it was the same way. I didn't really understand why I should be wearing this outside of, I'm wearing one now, besides a regular watch, till that 2F authentication on the phone. So I didn't have to get out my phone. I could just tap the watch. That was the use case that got me to commit to wearing the Apple Watch every day. And now I do it, whether it's for fitness or whatnot, but I mostly just tell the time with it at this point.
Yeah, I never went down the Apple Watch route. Yeah, it's interesting. For someone who's spent their life in high tech, I'm not a big gadget guy. I mean, I have in my shop, I have all kinds of tools, just whatever. I like to buy tools to make things, but I've never been much of a high tech gadget guy.
I am surrounded by gadgets. I think even from the Tesla to whatever, I think I'm not always the first early adopter, but I'm that second wave of let's get the one that is just slightly out of beta rather than the one that is a complete lemon.
Yeah, well, that's certainly like from a financial point of view, that's a much more prudent approach, I think.
What are your views on the future of UX design, especially in the context of the rapidly changing AI technologies?
Okay, so I was recently with a friend and we were talking sort of about the state of UX, and he felt like he was disappointed where UX had gotten to, like over the last 10 years. Like he felt like, if I'm going to paraphrase, that there was this idea that as opposed to just UI, UX was going to become something where there was more of an opportunity to participate at a strategic level as a partner with business and technology and marketing. And in fact, that really hasn't happened. I mean, there obviously are companies where design is more or less important, and there certainly are companies that were founded by designers. But in general, my sense is that the sort of power dynamic at least in tech, isn't really changed that much over all the time that I've been involved. And so, but what I'm wondering is, again, given what we were talking about earlier, where UI is starting to be something that you can iterate really quickly, it seems to me that it's possible that a result of that would be someone with, a design who's contributing at a design level, who's really, thinking about the human-centered aspect of this, trifecta of like, how do you make a product? If I was able to take a conversation and immediately render it tangible, like the vision that I get in my head, and be able to do it very rapidly, it's possible that I could then be seen more as a contributor to that strategic conversation. So that's my optimistic hope, is that because of AI and its ability to sort of take the tedium out of the part of our job, the design part of our job, the iterative part of our job, and enhance that, maybe UX actually can start to, rise to that promise that we all have, where, it's sort of an equal partner in setting the product strategy.
My optimistic view is that I hope that it is true. That kind of is some of the skills that I think we've talked about, what I'm trying to develop in my continuing learning. What skills are you working on in this phase of life?
So one, I'm just trying to figure out how to use ChatGPT to accelerate my process. I think I've seen some things that I haven't personally used, but like I've seen, AI personas, which that seems to me very possible, right? Like, again, talking about in other words, what I tell people when I start a new project is it's going to take something like 2 or 3 months before I'll really be able to start having ideas that you haven't already had, because it takes that long to do the research and to really internalize it. And I think, that's something that could really be accelerated if, it's a lot of work to interview users. I don't want to discount that as important. Like I have a hard time letting go of that as something that I'm going to do some of, but the more that, again, what ChatGPT provides me is right now, it's like I can have an expert in anything I want right away, and I don't have to go find them or, get their time or whatever. And I think if I could just start talking to my personas right away, that'd be amazing. So that's, one area that I've been focused on. I also, again, like last Saturday, I saw an interesting first kind of draft of like an AI prototyping environment, where they had brought together a bunch of models and you could access them, and you could, it was a way to sort of try out building an application that's partly declarative code or deterministic code and partly AI driven. And I think, that's something that I assume is going to get commercialized pretty soon. And as someone who's really interested in the developer experience, like that's where I've been focused mostly, is building technical tools for developers and other people. I think that's something I'm trying to pay attention to and understand. Is like, how is AI changing the developer experience?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I have philosophies on how, if you are a professional, you can get more out of AI than a non-professional. So like knowing what good is and figuring out where are the problem areas. You mentioned learning about ChatGPT. Are you exploring the custom GPTs? Have you made any that are useful?
Yeah, so I've made a one to help me write. So I gave it lots of my writing samples and information for my portfolio and stuff like that. So that's helpful for me when I want it. It can help me write in my voice, and it can also I've used it finds examples from things that I've written in the past that I might have forgot about. So that's been my main experience with it. I haven't really tried other people's, I haven't gone into the marketplace and grabbed other custom GPTs. Have you? Have you found any that are useful?
I found one that, I've made my own, but and I found those to be really useful. There's one that I've tried that is pretty useful, which was on character consistency, creating characters and being able to produce them in different poses with consistency. So trying to describe what I want in my mind as a character, it remembers that character, and then you can ask for it in various different poses.
Returning an image produced by DALL-E, is that what you're talking about?
It is returning an image produced by DALL-E. You can be very specific as to how you want it drawn, whether it's kind of a 3D animation look or 2D illustration or anime style. There's a few that I feel like DALL-E is pretty well versed in. It goes off the rails a lot, but you can see that the intent is followed much, much more specifically than Midjourney. I will say Midjourney produces a much better, higher quality image at this point, and you have a little bit more control over getting exact ratios of some visualization. It seems to be trained on a much broader variety of things, but I thought that was really interesting if you're trying to tell a story. We talk about for UX, like showing a user's journey, you can do that very quickly with the same character. And that it doesn't have to be that consistent, but consistent enough so that you understand this is the same character throughout this story. And that used to be something I could do, sketch it out. I still can, but this is a different way of doing it. To your point, like training it on your own style and your own writings, it hasn't been able to, it's not that good at training it for my own illustration style. I think it's better at if I describe what it is, then it'll maybe do it. But DALL-E 3 hasn't really been trained on that much of similar styles as my sketch illustrations.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah, I think right now the image production stuff that I've seen is, for example, for the stuff you're using where you're making animations or you're making a book or whatever, or all that stuff's awesome. Obviously I'm interested in what I was talking about earlier about how can I get it to make actual UIs that are sensible, right? Mm. And there's some early tools there. There's a product called Semantic. I think it's called Cocoy.ai that I've looked at. But that's still, to me right now at least, that's still a ways out there. I don't know when it's going to happen, but right now I have yet to find any tool. And you tell me if you've seen something.
No, totally agree.
Where I could be I gotta draw this and draw that, and it's still like Figma in my design system, and it's still pretty manual.
Well, I don't discount Figma from coming up with some sort of AI solution.
That's what I expect. Honestly, that's what I expect. Really the answer to your question, Tiffany, is I'm probably going to start really using AI tools in my design process when the tools that I already use incorporate that. I appreciate, I think you've been really great going out and learning all kinds of new stuff. But for me, and probably for a lot of designers, it's if Photoshop has it, then I'll use it. Or, if Figma has it, then I'll use it. And the one place that I've just been trying to, as someone who does design tools, is I've been trying to see what are the patterns by which AI is brought into creative tools. And that's an area we could talk about a little bit. I think there's a couple things that I'm seeing that I think are trends. One is this iteration thing that I was talking about. But a really interesting piece there is how to control that iteration. Like you mentioned about like Dolly or Midjourney going off the rails, right? I think we've all had that experience using these AI tools where like you're telling it to do something and it starts being what you want, and then you give it another prompt and it's not what you want anymore. And so I saw there's a very interesting tool called Viscom, which is it's really for industrial designers. So like you give it a sketch and it can render that sketch almost immediately. It's some, photorealistic. And they have a couple of features that are pretty cool. Like one of them is there's like a slider that basically tells the AI how seriously does it need to take my sketch. Like if it's 100%, then like it'll render literally right on top of the drawing that you give it. Versus if it's 0, like, it'll go crazy. And so I think that's an interesting notion of like, how much can you be creative with the prompt I'm giving you? And another thing that they have that's pretty cool is they have a difference between generate and refine. And I think that's, like what, for example, ChatGPT doesn't really have. Midjourney has that a little bit, right? I mean, like you get the 4 things and you pick on that and you want it, right? I think that's going to be another feature that we're going to start seeing in tools more often, like generate and then something
reroll. Reroll
versus, reroll versus like in this Viscom, like you can literally draw around a region of the drawing and say like, don't change that, change this, or change that, don't change this. And I think that's another kind of pattern that we're going to start seeing in our creative tools.
I'm seeing that in some of the video editing tools. I think Google had one. I think it's called Lemire. I could be wrong at this point.
Yeah, I just was reading about that today. I haven't looked at it. Did you watch a video on it?
Yeah, you can like kind of circle a part of the thing that you want to animate and have only that part animate. And the video that I saw was showing it next to another tool, InGen. So those two seem like they're pretty good at doing a lot of this AI video, especially that in painting, selecting a particular portion or even extending. So if you have a video that's this size and you wanted it to be square, you could have it fill in with AI the whole video, which I thought was super cool.
Yeah. I mean, I saw that Photoshop has that feature, but I'm sure the animation tools will have it as well.
I am waiting for Photoshop to get a bit better at their AI generation. To your point, I love having the AI incorporated in tools that are already in my purview rather than learning completely new things. Midjourney has high enough quality that I will put in the effort to do it, but it's not a designer's tool, to say the least.
No. Yeah, it's like more like an illustration and an art. And I think that's, again, something that, I think, it plays well with the stuff that you've been working on. But like, for me, like designing these technical tools, it's not really very useful. I mean, I've thought about doing what you said about like, well, I could actually make a story about a persona that's fully illustrated, but that isn't something that I really do now because it's so much work. I mean, I just tell stories either with prose or like with screens, and I'm not sure if there's actual value in investing in, creating a movie about a persona. I mean, I could see where...
I was going to say, once they, like the DALL-E 3 generation, can make a screen for you that actually follows the description of what you're saying, then it might be more valuable from a UX context.
Yeah.
But right now, it's not there.
Yeah, the only thing where I think about that is like, situations where I've been able to use videos of users reacting to a prototype or something like that as a very compelling way to get other stakeholders to maybe change their opinion about what the design should be or something like that. I mean, I could imagine like creating animations that are compelling in that way, although then that starts to be like, well, wait a minute, maybe that's not legit, because if I'm like making up a narrative about what a persona wants, that's kind of different than actually showing a real user reacting to a prototype.
Yeah, I do think that it's a little tricky. It's almost like you want to be able to pull out a lot of the quantitative data and shove that into the persona and have it create a persona for you. Maybe you could put in the transcripts of all of the interviews that have gone on and assess it in that way. Maybe that would be less biased than just assuming you know that user.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I don't like right now if I say to ChatGPT, listen, pretend you're, a developer and blah, blah. Like, I don't really have any validation that what it's telling me is actually, I don't know. It's confusing. It's confusing to know how seriously trust. That's a big issue. That's another huge thing that I think is okay. Sorry. Switching gears. I just realized another key thing that I think UX is going to need to think about a lot is trust, right? Like, how can we convey in these experiences that people are having how much they should be trusting the information that they're getting from this AI? And it's one thing if what it's telling you is like, hey, I think you should watch this movie, big deal. But if it starts telling you like, about financial decisions that you might make, then it's a lot more important that there's some kind of way to establish trust. And so I think, like in the sort of statistical world, right, there's various ways to represent uncertainty graphically. They're pretty nerdy. And I think, right now, like a lot of, the state of the art in a lot of UX is like, how many stars does this have, right? And I think we're going to need, I don't know what they are, but we're going to need other ways of conveying, like, how much do you trust this information, or where did it come from, or like, how do I,
or how much confidence should I have in this response? Like, how confident are you, AI, in this response that you just generated?
Right. That's exactly. In other words, in the statistical field, right, there's all these sort of standards about how you represent a confidence interval, right? Mm-hmm. Because, when you're talking about probability, when you're talking about the world we live in where, it's a stochastic world, there's always random variables. Nothing, like if I ask you, how much do you weigh, right? Like there isn't actually an answer to that question because it varies all the time. And I think you made a great point is that we're going to need to somehow, in a non-nerdy way, when you're asking AI a question, you need to see like, what is, this is the token that it picked of all the, the tokens that came up to it. This is the one it picked to give me the next word. But what were the other ones that it could have picked? And what's the, sort of distribution of like, is it really narrow, like it knows this thing really well, or is it very broad and it could have picked anything?
Yeah, I do kind of harken back into the Einstein recommends days where it would show how confident are you in this response? Because I get responses from ChatGPT that make no sense. I was reading someone's LinkedIn post this morning, and it was talking about a case study and using LLM as a digital twin for just what you're saying, this persona. And they were talking about a grocery store use case and asking its users what they should change. And the results or the conclusions were to make things that people are trying to buy closer to the cash register, which is the exact opposite. Like that's only one piece of it. That's only thinking about the usability of the grocery store. But the bottom line of the grocery store is they want you to look around. They want you to go all the way to that corner so that you see X, Y, and Z, like the Costco effect of hunting for something that maybe you don't need, but at least maybe you'll buy it on the way out. So there's all these different factors that do not even come into that digital twin persona that you're asking for. And if that's what you're basing your strategy on, it may not be the best from a social or economical value standpoint.
Yeah. So I'm convinced we're going to start having some kind of validation or verification or like, I don't know what it is, but I guess, like I said, I think that's a big UX challenge, trust.
Totally. Trust, I mean, it's It's a UX challenge, it's a human challenge, it's a relationship building challenge. I've really enjoying this conversation. I am looking at how long we have gone on for, and I know we could go on for another hour. I'd like to ask you, like, what are you most excited for? What is next for Tim?
Current project that I'm working on, is that the one that's going to develop, like this team that I'm working with, they have a lot of opportunity to grow and we could become something really great that clicks really well? Or is there some other team in the future? But that's what excites me, is working with other people aligned on, just like with a sports team. Like what I love is that, like you pass the ball, the person, you don't even have to look and they get it. And I'm looking for that kind of experience with another software development team.
What are you reading or what are you watching? What should everybody be reading and watching?
Well, okay, I just finished reading this book, The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. So I guess we would call this science fiction, but it's more like extrapolation. I mean, I guess all science fiction is that, but it's really like, okay, where is this global warming thing like happening going to take us? And so it spins out a pretty dire short-term future and then a much more optimistic long-term future about, the human species actually getting it together. Human species, like just political things starting to work where there's collaboration and cooperation across the globe to actually try to address some of these problems. Another thing I loved about it was it very explicitly talks about something called a wicked problem, which is as a systems thinker, that's a fascinating thing, which are these problems that, you can't really ever solve them. You can just sort of mitigate them. And so I liked that was brought in. So that was really great. As far as like on a much more short-term basis, I think, my good friend Jorge Arango writes a newsletter called Information with a C in there. Anyways, I think that's a great newsletter. It's always filled with really interesting, his observations, and then he links you to some really nice stuff. The Rundown is a newsletter that I subscribe to that you get every day, and it just gives you some latest bit about what's going on with AI. That's how I heard about this Lumiere thing that you're talking about. Like that, I learned about that this morning from reading The Rundown.
Cool. And who should I interview next?
Well, I think you should interview Jorge Arango. He just wrote a book about note-taking, which, when he told me that's what he was writing about, I was like, really? That's a book? But I think it's pretty interesting the way he sort of imagines like this, sort of this multimodal digital space that's constructed through notes and stuff like that. And so anyways, he's got a podcast. So I know he's, he's got a good presence. He's a designer that's very thoughtful, very well read, and would have a lot of interesting things to say about growth mindset, the future, et cetera.
I want to thank you for your time. And I always enjoy having these conversations with you, Tim. And this is a new format for us.
Yeah, it was great, Tiffany. The one thing you didn't ask me about was role models, because I wanted to say you're one of my role models.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's because
you want me to ask you about your role models?
Well, I'm just jumping in and telling you that, one of them is you, because I really appreciate the way that you are so involved with the, connecting with the people that you work with and maintaining these emotional connections. And I admire that. And I aspire to be as good at maintaining connect. Well, I can't be as good as you, but you definitely inspire me.
Thank you, Tim.
Hi, I'm Tim Sheiner, and I watch Cocoy.ai on YouTube, and I urge you to also, if you want to get great tidbits on technology as well as design and creative careers.
It's always a work in progress. I appreciate you, Tim.
Okay, appreciate you too.
All right.
Okay, bye.